It's running on an open public network, the Stellar Network. The Stellar Network.
222 Day, we will talk about XLM and their work with USDC in Ukraine, and how Circle and USDC have ties into BlackRock, and how that ties back into initial investments into Stellar. And with all of the MoneyGram logos shown on this article about Ukraine and Stellar, and how MoneyGram has just come out and talked about further integration with Stellar and rolling it out now, it seems as if Ukraine's CBDC and its DLT infrastructure are in fact powered on Stellar, as has been called out since 2021. And now we have an announcement that illustrates how Stellar, Circle, and BlackRock have invested $15 billion in order to rebuild Ukraine, and a lot of that is involved in creating a DLT financial infrastructure. Before I start this, I want you to pay attention to who these people are, and pay attention to the debit card companies who are involved in this, because I have just talked about one of them in my previous video and their extremely deep ties into Stellar. And also, it's important to pay attention to who they are because of this document here.
We are the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine, and we are the actually largest banking union in the market. We unite more than 96% of all the assets of the banking system, not just the banks, but the non-banking financial companies as well, since recently. We are, in terms of our cooperation, we cover all the issues that are anyhow connected with the financial sector. And of course, we're tightly cooperating with all the international partners, such as the IMF, the IFC, the World Bank, and so on and so forth. Before telling about the landscape, I think it's obvious that we need some context, and unfortunately the context is about war. So since the war started last year, I mean the large-scale war, the banks have been continuing operating stably. The banks have been continuing providing the same amount and the same level of services, which is pretty awesome because of all the things happening. And if we talk about the war context, also the really important thing is that we do have a success story. If we talk about the landscape and infrastructure in particular, is introducing of the sort of project called Power Banking. Is the network of the real physical offices of the systematically important banks that even during the blackout could provide it, and they did that, the basic banking services, so the population didn't miss any day and there was no pause in all that. We have 99% of the market share in between Visa and MasterCard, and we also do have the national payment system.
To tie USDC and BlackRock in here, DC is essentially the de facto US digital dollar at this point. And of course, it has extremely deep ties into BlackRock, who are also extremely tied into the creation of Stellar, which I will talk about here in a bit. Circle holds its reserves in global systemically important banks and in BlackRock. Here is confirmation of the integration with Stellar, Circle, and the Ukrainian DLT infrastructure.
Stellar blockchain aid disbursement system is live.
And that is an older announcement, I think from 2022. However, with all of the recent developments with Ukraine and with Stellar, it appears as if the Stellar DLT infrastructure as a whole, it is actually live now. And it just so happens that on October 1st of 2024, Stellar's CEO went on Bloomberg to explain how DLT is able to provide financial services as humanitarian aid with the Ukrainian example. Here is Candace Kelly, who is the chief legal officer at Stellar, explaining how the Ukrainian DLT infrastructure is on Stellar and is operational.
Market organization, which we've learned is a very competitive market out there. Who's going to give me aid, and how do I build trust with my donors? Well, they have a solution now where instantaneously they can send aid in the form of a US dollar-backed stablecoin, USDC, to aid recipients, some of whom are sitting in a bunker. They can do it 24/7. They don't have to go out into the danger zones. And those recipients in Ukraine, there's not a huge unbanked problem, but some are unbanked. They can go into a MoneyGram location, which is integrated with the Stellar network, get local currency. Some of them may feel like they need to leave Ukraine, and they go to Poland. They go to whatever country they go to on the Stellar network, as long as they have, there's a MoneyGram location, and there are, I think, 300 countries, they can cash out in local currency. So there's this transparency element, there's a safety element, there's a speed element, and Ukraine, so President Zelensky actually came and met with us pre-war and was very fixated on corruption. And obviously they have a strong reputation for corruption, and he was intent on fixing that. And some of that was using the transparent blockchain network. So another endeavor in Ukraine, which is not aid related, but I think will be Reconstruction related, is the transparent network, which is the Independent Association of Banks of Ukraine have gotten together, and it's right now in friends and family pilot stage, but an instant payments network, and there are merchants involved, and so people in Ukraine are going to be able to use stable reserve currencies and transact with merchants and have the banking system engaged in that. And it's running on an open public network, the Stellar network. And in anticipation of, I don't know how all of you smart people make these estimations, but $500 billion in Reconstruction is what I've seen. If that is coming in you're a country where corruption is a huge concern, and the speed and of getting that aid into the hands of people who need to use it, a transparent network that is essentially instantaneous is huge. So with the corruption concerns and then with aid,
Stellar has been talking about this Ukrainian humanitarian aid work for quite a while now. And it's all about how to send stable coins in between digital wallets and then having on and off ramps, which is essentially what a CBDC is, which then ties into how the Ukrainian humanitarian aid was probably a advanced pilot to test how Stellar could in fact run the Ukrainian financial infrastructure. In early 2023, the Ukrainian Tascom Bank hryvnia, I have no idea how to pronounce that. I don't know, I'm just trying, had an electronic money pilot report that recommended the adoption of DLT to transform the payment landscape of Ukraine. And that just happened to involve Stellar. In December of 2021, the same pilot with the same bank was working with BITS to test out a CBDC as a pilot. And it all revolved around Stellar and BITS digital currency management system that was about issuing stablecoins or CBDCs on an open DLT with asset control capabilities for issuers, which the Stellar Consensus Protocol has clawback and freeze, which are exactly the kinds of features that these huge institutions want to have. And it's also worth pointing out that the XRPL doesn't have either of those finalized yet. Here we begin to get into the ties in between BlackRock and Stellar specifically, which I will expand on as I have uncovered a whole lot on this.
Hello everyone, I'm Joyce Kim from Stellar.org, and we're building a financial system for the world's poor. So this here is my grandmother. She's cute, right? So on this day, I actually remember traveling hours to the temple.
Yeah, I'll cut this one just because it's not directly applicable to the Ukrainian content. She goes on to explain about how Stellar is concentrating on remittances, which is exactly what the UNHCR project was about, which was essentially a CBDC pilot for Ukraine, which has ended up with the Ukrainian DLT infrastructure running on Stellar. And if you look here, in 2015, they call out Google and BlackRock. And if you have time and you check into who were some of the early investors in Stellar, each of those entities pops up. And it's a lot easier to find information on that topic around Google, except it's almost impossible to find anything on BlackRock. With that said, I have found some references to that, and I'll expand on it even further at a different time because it has huge implications. Here is one of the references I found, and it's not an official PR or anything, but it calls out how Stripe, BlackRock, Google, and Fast Forward were all involved in the initial funding of Stellar. Here is a BIS paper from 2021 talking about the development of CBDCs. And on page 8, it specifically calls out Ukraine, which appears to have had a pilot as early as 2018, except it's almost impossible to find anything on that. To come back into the debit card bit, Visa and MasterCard are involved with 7 Ukrainian banks to test out P2P or account-to-account DLT payments. And who has just recently come out even more on involvement with MasterCard? Well, it is Stellar. And that was how they are essentially creating a username address, which makes it a lot easier to send P2P or account-to-account transactions because you're not relying on wallet addresses, which, to be honest, an average person won't be able to handle that. And here is the important thing about the development of a Ukrainian DLT infrastructure, which is from October of 2014, which then explains a little bit more on that 2018 pilot called out in that BIS paper. And it is an agreement in between the EU and the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine. And here it specifically calls out developing an infrastructure for interbank services based on modern information technologies and international standards. And that 2014 date is extremely interesting because Stellar was officially created in 2014. You can go on the IABU site and check out who's involved, but to put it simply, there are 73 members in the AAB with about 902 billion in assets. I'm not sure if that's USD, except it sounds about right. I have a couple of examples of Ukrainian banks involved. Here we've got Bank Vostok joining in 2016. You've got Alliance Bank that have 31 branches on the network in 2024. You've got Ostchad, not sure again. That is directly calling out its involvement in power banking, which, if you recall, was discussed here.